Howdy, for our group presentation, we're going to be presenting over the global supply chain disruptions and resilient strategies.
Here are a few things that will be discussed in our presentation. Firstly, meet our team. I'm Nicole.
I'm Kathy.
And I'm Cameron.
A major vulnerability in global supply chains today is the over-reliance on single-source suppliers, particularly those based in high-risk regions. So what do we mean by single-source supplier? Essentially, it's when a company relies on just one supplier for a particular component, material, or product. This can streamline procurement, reduce costs through economies of scale, and simplify relationships. And that's why many companies choose this model, because it seems efficient. We saw this clearly during the COVID-19 pandemic when factories in certain regions shut down completely and entire supply chains ground to a halt. More recently, natural disasters, infrastructure issues, and geopolitical tensions have exposed just how fragile these dependencies can be. For example, manufacturers in parts of Southeast Asia have faced flooding that disrupted operations, and coastal regions like the Gulf Coast of the US are exposed to hurricanes that can shut down ports and production facilities. Even areas with limited transportation networks, unstable power grids, or shifting political landscapes can cause serious bottlenecks. So the danger here is clear. If that one supplier is disrupted due to anything from a pandemic to a port closure or regulatory shift, the company has no immediate alternatives. And this can then create a ripple effect: delays in production, increased costs, and unmet customer demand. And if this problem isn't addressed, the long-term consequences can be serious: lost revenue, strained customer relationships, and weakened competitive position. In short, relying too heavily on one supplier in a vulnerable location introduces a level of risk that many companies just can't afford. And the impact is real. According to Accenture, supply chain disruptions cost global businesses over $4 trillion in lost revenues in 2020 and 2021 alone.
So one example that deals with our problem identification is the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. This natural disaster exposed the automotive industry's dangerous over-reliance on single Japanese suppliers for critical components like electronics and pigments. The disaster crippled manufacturing in the region, causing widespread production halts for major automakers globally, including Toyota. The single point of failure led to significant financial losses and market share shifts. The crisis served as a stark reminder of the risks associated with concentrated supply chains, prompting companies to rethink their strategies. In response, many automotive manufacturers began diversifying their supplier base geographically, increasing inventory levels, and implementing more robust risk assessments to avoid similar disruptions in the future. Another example regarding the over-reliance on a single-source supplier in a high-risk area are the 2011 Thailand floods and the hard disk drive industry. There was a significant blow to the global supply chain because Thailand served as a major production hub for these parts. Because of the extensive and prolonged flooding, all the factories and equipment that produced these parts were completely wiped out. And even though there were multiple manufacturers, the regional concentration of this product acted as a single point of failure. The immediate impact was a drastic reduction in the worldwide supply of hard disk drives, leading to a significant price spike and extended lead times for consumers and businesses. Downstream industries such as PC and server manufacturers like Apple and Dell faced production delays and increased costs due to shortages of this essential component. This crisis shows that a single-source supplier, in this case Thailand, could completely hurt the supply chain because they're located in a high-risk, prone area.
To better understand how global supply chain disruptions impact business operations, we can look at two key concepts from this course: the bottleneck effect and the bullwhip effect. Let's start with the bottleneck effect. This happens when one stage of the supply chain, whether it's a supplier, production site, or transportation hub, can't keep up with the flow of goods or information. It then slows down everything that comes after it. In the context of global disruptions, a single source supplier affected by something like a natural disaster or labor shortage can quickly become a bottleneck. Even if the rest of the supply chain is fully operational, everything stalls because that one critical point can't deliver. For example, during the early months of the pandemic, factories producing semiconductors couldn't meet demand due to shutdowns. This created bottlenecks for industries like automotive and consumer electronics, both of which rely heavily on those components. Now, the bullwhip effect takes this further. It refers to how small changes in customer demand at the retail level can lead to increasingly larger shifts in inventory and ordering patterns as you move upstream toward distributors, manufacturers, and suppliers. During periods of disruption, companies often respond with panic buying, over-ordering, or hoarding inventory to protect themselves from future shortages. But this creates massive demand distortions. Suppliers see a sudden spike and ramp up production only to face a collapse in demand once the panic subsides. This is exactly what happened in industries like toilet paper, bicycles, and even some medical supplies. These two concepts highlight how fragile and reactive supply chains can become when there's poor visibility, over-reliance on limited sources, and a lack of flexibility. Ultimately, both the bottleneck and bullwhip effects underlie why resilience strategies like building supplier redundancy, improving demand forecasting, and enhancing supply chain transparency are so critical in today's environment.
Our next course concept is outsourcing versus insourcing. So, as we learned in class, outsourcing is defined by the acquiring goods or services from outside the firm. Companies usually outsource because it cuts costs and frees up resources. They're also able to access expertise, technology, and markets that you might not otherwise. And it also increases efficiency and shortens cycle time. However, the pitfall of outsourcing to a single supplier, especially in a high-risk environment, is the lack of communication between you and the external supplier, causing uncertainty in all parties. This brings us to insourcing, keeping the processes in-house. Even a single supplier that is internal allows for more control over quality, timeliness, and compliance. There will be fewer coordination headaches. Additionally, protecting intellectual property and builds internal flexibility. Next, let's talk about offshoring. Based on what we learned in class, offshoring happens when a firm shifts parts of its operation either through outsourcing or insourcing to a different country. This could be moving a manufacturing plant overseas or hiring foreign vendors to handle key processes. This method is attractive because of lower labor costs. However, it disrupts the global supply chain, especially when a firm offshores to a single supplier. Things like political wars, natural disasters, or border shutdowns, and the company's supply chain line is cut. Companies cannot be too dependent on offshoring. And lastly, the total cost of ownership refers to the total estimated cost of an item over its entire life cycle. This includes the sum of acquisitions, ownership costs, post-ownership costs incurred for a product. Too many companies make sourcing decisions based on purely the lowest unit of price, but what they fail to consider is that a cheap single-source supplier in a politically unstable or disaster-prone region can end up costing far more in the long run. When a single-source supplier goes down, the cost piles up. Production halts, shipments are delayed, customers are angry, and the company all are scrambling for emergency alternatives. These are all the costs that should be considered. Lastly, let's shift our focus to our proposed resilience strategies. Our first strategy is nearshoring. This involves relocating production or sourcing closer to home in order to reduce exposure to geopolitical uncertainty and complex global logistics. For example, Intel Company has invested heavily in domestic semiconductor manufacturing facilities in the United States. While this approach may increase upfront costs, the benefits, such as shorter lead times, improved oversight, and reduced exposure to overseas instability, makes it a strategic move for long-term resilience. The second strategy is stockpiling, also referred as maintaining safety stock. Leading tech company Apple has been known to secure and store key components like semiconductors during supply constraints to ensure production. This approach provides flexibility and operational stability when suppliers experience delays or interruptions. And lastly, for our third strategy is to use a factor rating system like we learned in class. This method involves assessing and ranking suppliers based on a variety of risk factors, including financial, geopolitical, location, and operational reliability. Large organizations such as IBM actively use these systems to monitor risk and make informed decisions about sourcing and diversification. Thank you.
Here are the sources we used to support our research and examples throughout the presentation. We pulled information from a mix of industry reports, news articles, and case studies to make sure our analysis was accurate and well-rounded.